It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland. That'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, it's go time, ladies and gentlemen. We've been talking about it for a long time, almost as long as I've been doing the podcast, actually. The Iowa caucuses are upon us. They're finally here. And I wanted to, for people around the world, really, that listen to this podcast and watch it on YouTube, explain a little bit about how the caucuses work, and then give you a preview, a rundown of the candidates from the world of podcast by George. So let's get going here. You know, the Iowa caucuses they came around after that debacle in 1968 with the convention in Chicago. Maybe you've seen the riots in the street, the film of Dan Rather being assaulted on the floor of the convention. And I mean, they didn't want any more of that. They wanted a more orderly process, and they decided to go with Iowa as the first in the nation caucus. And for a lack of a better description, I tell people that the caucus basically is kind of like a parlor game. If you think of when politics was in the parlor in the neighborhoods, you would go to a friend's house or somebody that was politically aware in the neighborhood, and you'd sit around and do the things, the fundamentals that need to be done to start the process of selecting a candidate. Well, of course, it's gotten much bigger and huge now. And it's on the radar screen of every major media outlet in the world, really, and they're all here in the heartland. And the way the caucuses works, I mean, they've changed it a little bit. One of the big changes used to be you walked in the door and you didn't have to do anything until people started selecting candidates, and you went off into your area with someone that was a precinct captain for that particular candidate, and that's how the process started. Now, you've got to declare your preference when you walk in the door. Now, we're talking about the Democratic presidential caucus here, and you go and then you find your precinct captain for that candidate, and then the discussions begin, the negotiations, the parlor game, so to speak. This part of it is kind of like if you remember as a kid, did you ever play that game Rover, Red Rover sends somebody right over? Well, that's kind of what it's like. You find out who the most popular candidate is in that precinct very quickly. You find out whether or not your candidate is viable, and some very simple math determines that. They have to have 15% of the caucus support for that candidate to be viable. If they're not, you can go join a candidate that is. You don't have to, but you can, and they're going to want you to. Because the critical part, really, of the caucuses, other than determining the winners and finding who's viable, is selecting delegates for the county, state, and national conventions. That's really important. And it was kind of brought to bear, really brought out in a painful way after 2016. A lot of the Democratic people that have been participating in caucuses for years and were lining up behind Bernie Sanders were a little shocked to find out that really Hillary Clinton had it won before the convention, certainly, but even before the Iowa caucuses, because superdelegates vote on the first ballot, used to, in the national convention. Well, who are the superdelegates? Well, they're all of the elected politicians on the national level, and they're people that are very heavily vested mainline Democrats on the local level. And Hillary had all those people. Bernie Sanders, and there was some news media coverage of this, they told people, a lot of folks didn't believe it or they didn't want to believe it, but Bernie Sanders didn't have a chance. He didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of becoming the nominee because of the superdelegates on the first ballot. Well, after that debacle, the Bernie supporters went to work, and Bernie Sanders got the superdelegates taken off of the first ballot. So now when you elect your delegates on your county and state level, and they go to the national convention, their vote actually counts and cannot be overridden by superdelegates on the first ballot. Now, there's a caveat. There's something very important to be considered here, and I've pointed this out on the podcast lots of times. Never before have we had this many candidates on the Democratic side going to the convention, unless a bunch of them fall off, to be nominated on the first ballot. Your winning candidate, the nominated candidate, has to have 50% of the support to win on the first ballot in the convention, national convention. If they don't, if no one gets 50%, it goes to what is called a brokered convention, or the second ballot. Guess who comes into play then? Yeah, the superdelegates. So this is very concerning, and it should be very alarming to the Bernie Sanders folks, because, again, it looks like a way to keep him from being the nominee, because those people are all of the mainline status quo corporate Democrats that populate the House and the Senate on the national side, and then also local Democrats, politicians, and again, these mainline status quo type people, and they're not Bernie Sanders folks. So if nobody gets 50%, it goes to the second round. They're going to nominate somebody from the status quo, and it doesn't even have to be one of the current candidates that we've all been watching and following on the national stage here for the better part of a year and a half. It can be somebody that hasn't been out there, hasn't spent a dime. It could be, I mean, this is almost laugh out loud funny, but it could be Hillary Clinton. A lot of these people are very close to Hillary Clinton. The superdelegates have worked for her. They've come from her campaign. They've been friends of hers. They're well-moneyed, wealthy PAC people. Those are the people that would take over in the second round of the National Convention. But we get ahead of ourselves. Let's go way back now and get to the beginning here with the Iowa caucuses. So Red Rover sends somebody right over. You find candidates that have 15% support and take it from there. So let's run down the candidates. I promised that I was going to do this. We've had some of this on the podcast off and on throughout the year, but I wanted to start, and I'm going to limit it to 6. And I'm going to use as my primer here a little rundown that came from CNN, and then also I think some of this information came from Reuters or USA Today. But they start, the CNN rundown started with Michael Bloomberg, believe it or not. Before we get to him, though, I want to include somebody that they didn't, who's Andrew Yang. And Yang's got a lot of support. I like him because he's got young support. I like him because he's got that UBI, that Universal Basic Income concept. He's got some good ideas. He's got this artificial intelligence thing down. He knows how the country is changing. And my God, if you can't see that, I mean, you've seen what's happening with Amazon, right? I mean, it's happening. It's going to happen. The world is changing. Employment and income for Americans is going to change dramatically, perhaps in a Gummer's lifetime like mine, but certainly shortly thereafter. The two professions that I can think that are going to go completely out of the window are professions like truck driving. I mean, there were two things that you could always do when I was a kid. You could drive a truck or you could paint houses. I don't know, maybe they're going to come up with a way to paint houses robotically or something like that. But these truck drivers, again, that's going to change. They're going to find another mode of transportation. Those folks are all going to be out of work. And a huge percentage of our workforce is devoted to the transportation on wheels of products, goods, and services across this nation. And Yang gets that, but he's way out there. He's way too early. People view this as communism or socialism or whatever. He's got kind of a regressive tax proposal to pay for this in some ways, which I'm not too crazy about. But Andrew Yang is the number 6 candidate. Number 5, according to CNN, you're going to be shocked by this. The guy these are all candidates that they believe have a real opportunity to win the nomination, and the Iowa caucuses won't come into play for this guy because he's not campaigning. He's not a part of the deal in Iowa. But I was surprised to find out that they believe that Michael Bloomberg is a real threat to win the nomination. And the reason for that is because he's got all of this money. He's a pay-to-play guy. He's like Tom Steyer. He jumped right to the top of the polls. He got name recognition with his money, and he's chugging along. Now, I don't particularly like Michael Bloomberg for a couple of things. He was the mayor of New York City and started that stop and frisk thing. You may have seen a podcast here recently, podcast by George with Pramila Malik, who I consider to be one of the world's foremost authorities on the climate crisis. And she gives Bloomberg an F in her home state of New York for his dealings with the climate. So Bloomberg is off of the slate for podcast by George. He won't be a role in the Iowa caucuses, but I wanted to mention him because he's going to be a player. This is how money has poisoned the well of politics in America. Michael Bloomberg, number 5 on this CNN list of potentials. Number 4 that they're going to, Elizabeth Warren. And she's been up and down in the Iowa caucuses. She's got a hell of an organization here. You probably have heard me say I'm not that up with Elizabeth Warren because I look at her and why are you running? And what are you all about, really? Because Elizabeth Warren, a lot of folks don't know this, she was a Republican until she was almost 50 years old. She voted for Ronald Reagan twice. Now, this is a progressive podcast. I know most of the folks watching this are left-leaning at the very least. The question for you is, did you vote for Ronald Reagan twice? Elizabeth Warren did. Did you vote for George Bush? George Bush 1? Did you vote for him? Elizabeth Warren did. What kind of person is that? Did you fill out registration forms at the university or college that you went to stating that you were an American Indian? Elizabeth Warren did. Did you go around telling people to gain favor and maybe even win a political office that your father was a hard-working, blue-collar janitor? Elizabeth Warren did. Her brother said that wasn't true. It gets worse. She tells a story out on the campaign trail that she was the first woman nursing a baby, I believe is the way that she put it, and passed the New Jersey Bar, the first woman to do that. The New Jersey Bar Association said, we've been given legal exams since the 1800s. We don't poll people on whether or not they're nursing when they pass the exam. There's no way for us to know that. Therefore, there's no way for Elizabeth Warren to know that. She said that she got fired from a job as an educator because she became pregnant. People did a basic fact check on that by looking back at the age of her children, how old she was when she had that. It wasn't true. That slam or slight against Bernie Sanders that she participated in, a guy that's been a stalwart of women's issues for 50 years, I mean, longer than most people have even been alive, there's real reason to believe that ain't true. So I've got a little problem with Elizabeth Warren being the nominee. So and she's got a lot of support here. I know a lot of people like her. She's big into identity politics, apparently. I look at this and why are you running? Is it because you're an older woman and Hillary Clinton lost in 2016 and there's this group of vanquished older women running the Democratic Party that want to get one of their own back in the race? They'd like to have one of their own in the White House, and they feel like they got gypped out of that by Donald Trump's victory in 2016. I'm not up with that either. I mean, that's not Elizabeth Warren. Not good. Not for me. All right, let's move on to the number 3 nominee, the number 3 potential to win the nomination and take the fight to the White House against Donald Trump. And you got to remember that. And that's also true with Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is unelectable. She can't beat Donald Trump. My God, he would wipe the floor with the things that I just mentioned. He's been all over that Pocahontas thing. You know that. You've got to flip the electoral map. That's the most important part about all of this. You've got to change those red states that overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump in 2016. You got to make those blue. Those folks, when Donald Trump brings up that stuff about Elizabeth Warren as an example, they ain't going to vote for her. You're going to get Donald Trump again in 2020. If you're an Elizabeth Warren supporter, you might as well switch parties and become a Republican like she was and go down and vote for Donald Trump. I'll give you another guy that's in the same camp, Pete Buttigieg. He's number 3 on this list. This is a guy that really has a lot of programs and policies that are very much akin to maybe a moderate or slightly liberal-leaning Republican. He's an openly gay man. He professes as much. I don't have to be worried about being politically correct saying that. He says that. Those red states on that electoral college map, are those people going to change blue to vote for Pete Buttigieg? And it isn't just that. This dude's got serious baggage, folks. Let me run down a couple of things. His background, he's a Navy intelligence officer. That's what he was in the military. He likes to talk about his military experience, but he was a spook. Have you looked at the Afghanistan papers? Do you know that 3 administrations have lied to American citizens about the war in Afghanistan? You know that the war in Iraq was based on a lie. That's a fact. That's history, folks. All of that stuff came from the intelligence community. He was a part of that. All of this Russiagate stuff, which has been proven to be a hoax, which has been debunked by, let me mention his name, Aaron Mate, if no other journalist, the guy that won the Izzy Award, has proven that that was baloney. Do you know where that came from? It came from the intelligence community. Do you know who feeds MSNBC those spy thriller novelettes that Rachel Maddow talks about every night on MSNBC? Yeah. It's the intelligence communities. The CIA and the FBI are feeding her that stuff. It's what caused everybody to get their shorts in such a bunch over the phone call to Ukraine that resulted in this impeachment proceeding, which is going to result quite possibly in Donald Trump being reelected. He's going to come out of this thing to his followers, to those red states on that electoral college map, as smelling like a rose, if you can believe that. Yeah. Those red states, not only are they not going to be moved to flip blue over the Russiagate and impeachment debacles, they're going to stay firmly red. If they do, can't reinforce this enough, it doesn't make any difference what the Democrats do in their caucuses and their nominating process, all of that. Donald Trump is going to be reelected in 2020. Got to find a candidate that is going to provide major change, break from the status quo, provide people who sat it out in 2020 and 2016 by and large, and will get up and vote for a Democratic candidate because they've got programs and policies and charisma for them. Pete Buttigieg ain't that guy. Number 2. Let's go to number 2. We're getting to it now. And number 2 is a tie between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden, my God, I don't need to get into this too much. Honest to God, it's a head shaker. It makes you wonder. You know, when I started this podcast, one of the reasons was, be real frank with you, I wanted to cut through the bullshit. Some of the bullshit that's a plague in America, that's afflicting all of us. And it's from the heartland. And people in the heartland understand bullshit. Did you ever think about why it's called bullshit? Why isn't it called cow shit? Because bullshit is bigger and it's stronger. Any farmer, any cowboy knows that. That's why everybody talks about bullshit. And Joe Biden is full of it. And it starts right at the top. This is a guy who goes around telling people he's the most knowledgeable person in foreign policy, not only in this race, but quite possibly in Washington, D.C. for the last 20 or 30 years. And he voted for the Iraq War. He voted to empower George Bush to go out and execute that war and execute 1 million, maybe, innocent civilians. 5,000 to 7,000 U.S. boys and girls in uniform and maimed several times more than that over a lie, over intelligence agency spook information that was completely wrong. It's been proven. And to all my Democratic friends, I just came out of a climate change thing, and it occurred to me they're all in a bunch because, and I am too, that you can't get so much of America to understand and believe in the climate crisis. They don't believe in science, and they're like, how can you not believe in science? Well, okay, we're getting ready to nominate a president. How can you not believe in history? And I'm not talking about dusty old books in the library. I'm talking about stuff that wasn't that long ago that most of us can remember. And George W. Bush created this war that Joe Biden bought into. And to quote the famous line from Casino that you've heard me talk about, Joe Biden is either too dumb or he's in on it. And he can't be president because of it. He's disqualified from the nomination because of that Iraq War vote, as far as I'm concerned. And the list goes on and on for Joe Biden. Is he Meshuggah? Yeah, did you see the Ed Fallon video? Here, let's take a look at that.
I like you, and I'm going to support you if you win the nomination because we got to get rid of Trump. But what are we going to do about climate change? Now, you say you're against pipelines, but then you want to replace these gas lines. That's not going to work. We got to stop building and replacing pipelines. You got to go vote for somebody else.
All right, thanks so much, sir. We're going to have you here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'm going to vote you in the general if you treat me
right.
right.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm not.
Well, can I have a
Look,
picture?
you're asking a picture of me, coming up and telling me you don't support me.
No.
My plan. Yeah, you did. You said
I said I would support you in the general.
In the general. I'm looking for a primary.
We're happy to get a number.
That's what I'm looking for, okay?
Just because we're trying to get.
You believe that Bernie can do something by 2030?
I'm actually supporting Tom Steyer.
Well, that's good. He's the guy that did
Thanks
more
so much,
coal
sir. We
mining.
have a long line right here.
Got more coal than the entire country did.
Okay.
All right, thank you. We're happy to get input.
That's the right
Can we
guy.
get a picture?
We're gonna.
No.
Yeah,
So, folks, well, you don't like that. I know I don't like that either. But to me, I look at that and I see a guy that's Meshuggah. I see a guy, if that was in a bar, you'd say, well, he's drunk. I mean, that touching of people and poking and grabbing of lapels and all that's been talked about. But Joe Biden's not drunk. He's just getting elderly. And that's what this is all about. He's got this misbegotten background, this terrible history of voting for war. And he ain't all there. Hate to say it. Don't vote for Joe Biden. He's got, again, Pramila Malik on Podcast by George gave Joe Biden an F in climate crisis as far as the climate change issue is concerned. A lot of the current problems were caused by Joe Biden's residency at the top of American government when he was vice president to Barack Obama and the all of the above energy policy with massive drilling, pipelines, opening the Arctic up to drilling twice. Joe Biden gets an F. He's not your guy. So, coming up, here we go. It's time for the burn. Bernie Sanders. Okay, you know I like Bernie Sanders, and you got to ask yourself why. Again, it's a history lesson. If you look at that Electoral College map and you look at how resoundingly Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton, and if you believe in history, come on, you believe in science when it comes to climate crisis, let's believe in history. You got to believe that they're not going to elect anybody that's similar to Hillary Clinton. What was Hillary Clinton? She was an extremely well-moneyed, big corporate PAC-funded candidate. She spent $1 billion, that's with a B, $1 billion on her campaign, and lost to a game show host like this. Look at that map. My God, you want to get as far away from that type of candidate as you possibly can. Americans were not interested in that in those red states. Yeah, the urban areas, the popular vote, yeah, she won by 3 million. So what? Doesn't make any difference. So find yourself a candidate that breaks with that offers something completely different, that offers things like an end to wars, an end to the current healthcare malaise that's afflicting America in more ways than one, with a Medicare for All program, a free college tuition program to uplift and promote American values and American business also. Having an educated, equipped electorate is good for everybody, folks. That's Bernie Sanders. It's just a minor history lesson. It only goes back 4 years. My God, you're not going to elect an Elizabeth Warren or an Amy Klobuchar or a Pete Buttigieg or somebody. Surely you can see better than that. And speaking of seeing better than that, I'm going to wrap it up here and talk about my favorite candidate of choice. And it's Tulsi Gabbard, and she's not 70 years old. She's not 78 years old like Bernie. You know, a lot of people say, oh, I like Bernie, I like his programs, but he's just too old. Okay, you know who's a hell of a lot younger and shares most of his programs? Yeah, it's Tulsi Gabbard. She's only 38 years old. She's not 70 like Elizabeth Warren. And Tulsi Gabbard came flying out of Hawaii. She got into politics for the most meritorious of reasons. They were putting a toxic dump on top of the main aquifer for the Hawaiian island that she lived on, and she got involved in local politics because of that. She was out in Hawaii, won that election. As a matter of fact, Tulsi Gabbard, you heard Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren bragging about. Tulsi Gabbard has won every election that she's been involved in. So let's go through it here. She starts for this extremely commendable reason in Hawaii. She joins the military after 9/11 because she wants to serve her country and do something about those people that came after us. She gets in the military, gets in the Middle East, and very quickly finds out in her role as a medic and watching all these blown apart people coming into the medical tents that this war is misbegotten, that it was a lie. She figured that out. Didn't take long, didn't take much. A lot of people did. I did. Now everyone is, because of the Afghanistan papers and because of other news that's come out about these wars. Tulsi Gabbard figured that out. She joined the U.S. House of Representatives, and she joined and became a member of the Armed Services Committees. She's on the Finance Committees. You ought to take a look at the committees that she serves on. She's very highly regarded. She becomes vice chair of the DNC. She's so highly thought of within the Democratic Party. And again, just like when she got to the Middle East, she got to the DNC and looked around and said, oh, man, this sucks. This is corrupt. They're screwing Bernie Sanders. They're not funding Bernie. All this money's going to Hillary's campaign. And so she resigned her vice chair in the Democratic National Committee and joined Bernie Sanders, and the smear wagon has been rolling ever since against Tulsi Gabbard, who is undefeated as far as elections are concerned. That's the other thing about Joe Biden. Just to get back, he's lost 3 or 4 elections. This is his 3rd or 4th run for the presidency. He's garnered a sum total in those runs for the presidency of 3 delegates. Joe Biden is a proven loser. Nobody likes this guy. Hillary talks about how nobody likes Bernie. He can fill a stadium with 100,000 people that are enthralled with him. They love the dude. I'll tell you who nobody likes, and it's Joe Biden. And I'll tell you who I like, and it's Tulsi Gabbard, for a lot of different reasons. And if you think the media and the political process in America doesn't need a little work, Tulsi Gabbard is again proving that true. You saw where Hillary Clinton said she was a Russian asset. My God, this is a woman that has volunteered for two tours in the Middle East, currently active, serving military. She's not a veteran. She's a major in the U.S. Army. And Hillary Clinton can sit and call her a Russian asset. And there's a series of town halls being held in New Hampshire. And the criteria, some of it has to do with polling, some of it has to do some other. Tulsi Gabbard meets all of it. Yeah, she's not being included by CNN, the media arm of the DNC. And that in itself is enough in closing to make me want to support Tulsi Gabbard. I'm going to declare when I walk into the caucus for our friend Tulsi Gabbard, I'll do what I can. If I can't make her viable at the caucus, I'll jump over to Bernie Sanders. But that's my rundown. That's the primer. That's the prep for the Iowa caucuses. I really appreciate you listening and watching along here as we've done this. This is a little bit longer than normal, I know. But after this, the Iowa caucuses are over with. That fire wagon pulls out of town, and there's not going to be much talk of Iowa. I've seen this movie before. So they'll move on to New Hampshire. They'll go on to the other, Super Tuesdays and all that after they leave Iowa. But the one thing I'll leave you with, the one bit of information that I've said before, and I'll say it again. Since 1976, every presidential nominee for both parties has won either Iowa or New Hampshire. And here's the way that it looks right now. Bernie Sanders, he's going to win New Hampshire. He's from Vermont. He's got a big win in New Hampshire. Right now, he's neck and neck. Some polls have him leading and some have him trailing a little bit in Iowa. Bernie wins Iowa, and he wins New Hampshire. If he doesn't get the nominee, that breaks with history. Remember, we were talking about history? Something might be afoot. The superdelegates may come into play in the second round. All that stuff we talked about earlier. Well, that's going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. We're going to move along here. We're going to come back with some more news, blues, and interviews. Right after the Iowa caucuses, I hope to have Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Politics at Iowa State University, on the program to do a caucus post-mortem. That's coming up. But for right now, that's another podcast by George.
Come on, let's hear it for him one time.